Good afternoon. It's an honor for me to present the history of, or the evolution of hydraulic brakes from 1917 to 1940. I'm glad to have had the collaboration of Steve Rode, who was in GM Research, and Bob Elton, who is another expert in the SAE Mobility History Committee. Moving on to the outline slide, from the 1880s to the First World War, automobile demand and rising speeds were limited by the brake system's poor performance. In pre-hydraulic days, hand and foot applied systems were complex, maintenance intensive, and often only worked on the rear wheels. Front wheel brake proposals, as you will see, first appeared in 1911. It was Malcolm Lockheed's patents between 1917 and 1926 which really enabled hydraulics to take the place which they still maintain today in the automotive world. From the mid-20s to the 1940s, hydraulics brakes evolved for cars, whilst trucks decided to go towards compressed air. And this situation is unchanged to the present. I now move to slide 4, or the next slide, the pre-hydraulic era. This horse and buggy basically had been used from the 15th century right to the 1890s. And they relied on wooden brake blocks applied via a mechanical spindle or lever to usually the narrow rear tire. And this was the best that could be done. So a lot needed to happen, and particularly to achieve brake compensation or even braking. And many designs were tried in these early years. By the time hydraulic brakes really arrived, some of these mechanical systems had up to 200 mechanical parts with 50 joints, 20 bearings, cables which would stretch, and a whole range of issues which could make life difficult. Moving on to the next slide, there were early attempts to develop front wheel brakes, which being steered was always a challenge. And this particular diagram shows three different attempts, and they were again mechanically operated by rods and cables, and needing frequent adjustment and almost continuous lubrication, and exposed to all the road dirt and flying gravel. A real breakthrough came in 1914, where the French company Perrot developed front wheel mechanical brakes to go with his rear wheel mechanical brakes. The key to this was getting the expansion of the brake shoes through to the steered wheel. And the diagram shows how there was a ball jointed rod which spread the shoes, and that was the key, and used, in fact, in this 1914 Formula One racing Delage car. Move to the next slide. The European-US mechanical brakes had ever tougher requirements. They were getting heavier. The cruising speeds were going up from 30 to 40 to 60 miles an hour. On many cases, you had to apply simultaneously hand and foot operation, which put huge demands on the drivers. And of course, the traction of dirt and dust and the need for adjustment was continuous. So looking how these brake designs evolved just before hydraulics, the small car on the left was the British Austin 7, which had four-wheel drum brakes. It was a tiny car with a 900cc engine. And next to it, in the same year, 1922, the most expensive car in the world, Rolls-Royce, still only had rear drum brakes and a transmission brake. They had not yet made the jump to front brakes. So that was in 1922. The key breakthrough came with a young inventor named Malcolm Lockheed, and he later changed the spelling of his name to Lockheed, Lockheed, and began design work on four-wheel hydraulic brake systems to improve all of the known problems that were there. And his key work happened between December 22 and July 1923, when he received 7 patents for his hydraulic brake designs. In 1923, in Detroit, he formed the Hydraulic Brake Company in Michigan to manufacture his brakes. The illustration shows a 1924 Chrysler, the first car in the US to have hydraulic brakes, and in the UK, a 1924 Triumph. And so there he had granted patents or licenses to manufacturers in those countries. The principle, of course, was the 1653 invention of Pascal's Law, which, where there's any increase in the fluid at one point, and at every other point, it will be balanced equally. And so this greatly reduced uneven braking, and the principle is clearly shown on the diagram. Another very early breakthrough in 1911 was by an American inventor, Mr. Waite, who in fact invented dual hydraulic circuits for the first time, and it would not be until 1939 that dual circuits will be used for the first time, and then on racing cars. So Mr. Waite was really ahead of his time, and using twin master cylinders, which again, a unique bit of design work so early in the development, and in fact a very early example of hydraulics. It preceded Malcolm Lockheed's work. To get hydraulics to work, the next slide shows the great challenge to go from leather cup seals, steam locomotive, end of the 1860s right up to the 1920s, to replace these leather cup seals with more modern, reliable rubber seals, both Buna and rubber and synthetic rubber, shown left and right. And of course, brake hoses was a major challenge, and for many years, up until 1914, they relied on drillings in the kingpin and the axle to get any hydraulic fluid to the front brakes. So moving to an example of what I just mentioned, 1911, Roland Pillan, his hydraulic front brakes was fed through a drilling in the axle. It's marked CD on the little drawing on the right, and then it was fed up through the kingpin, and from there to spread the front brake shoe. But in 1911, there were in fact front hydraulic and mechanical rear brakes, an unusual combination. The next slide, 15, shows the Rolls-Royce competition. Hispano-Suiza in 1919 had developed a mechanical servo to reduce the pedal effort of the four-wheel rod-operated brakes shown in this picture. And so Hispano-Suiza, it was a Franco-Swiss operation, and a competitor to Rolls-Royce and Bentley. Next slide, the real breakthrough came in 1921 in the US, when Duesenberg designed his own hydraulic four-wheel brake system for the Model A sedan, and raced the car on the right at the Indianapolis racetrack. And that was probably the first four-wheel application of hydraulic braking to racing. And there'll be at least 10 years before that was repeated. But so Lockheed was Duesenberg was way ahead of his time. In fact, was competing with Lockheed. 1921, Bugatti, the great French designer, designed his own front-operated hydraulic brakes with, as you can see, a flexible cable. The rear brakes, however, remains mechanical, in this particular race car in 1920-21. But you could see how people were struggling and adapting to bring brakes to the front wheels. This is a photograph of the downtown Detroit in May 1924, when the first World Motor Transport Congress was held. And it was also the first international presentation of Lockheed's patent hydraulic brakes. And of course, Duesenberg was there with his as well. So the interest really took off, starting with this great international exposition. As an example, I come back to the 1924 Triumph. That was from a company called Automotive Products in the UK. Quickly took a Lockheed license and produced this unusual external contracting drum brake for the 1924 Triumph. And again with a very daring flexible hose to the front axle. The next slide are the main components of Lockheed's system, which be it twin cylinder or single, it didn't matter, but the 1920 patent incorporated one of his key features, which was in red on the right, the compensation port, a very small diameter bleed hole, which allowed any remaining pressure in the brake lines to be returned into the brake reservoir. The Germans had a funny name for it called a Schnüffelloch, which translated means literally a sniffing hole, but be that as it may. Next slide. The Germans pressed ahead thanks to a license from Alfred James in Frankfurt. Alfred James later became Itt Automotive and is nowadays part of the Continental Group, the major German industrial group. This was the Adler standard 6-cylinder and the first German car to use Lockheed four-wheel brakes and supplied by James in Frankfurt. The next slide is a bit more detail about James. I had the good fortune to work for the company for a few years in the late 60s, mid 70s, and Alfred James was one of three brothers, and you can see the AT Lockheed advertising that he intensively did in spreading it over all the German-speaking countries. The other company which made an even bigger mark on the hydraulic brake industry was, of course, Bendix. And Malcolm Lockheed in 1929 sold his hydraulic brake company for $1 million to Bendix Aviation. And this sale included 56 patents. And with that knowledge and with the aerospace know-how, Bendix quickly became probably the largest braking system manufacturer in the world within 5 years, and had converted all of his brakes to hydraulic by the late 30s. Lockheed brakes were in fact kept in production with Bendix brakes, and they were produced also under license by the Wagner brake division, and also they were licensed in France, as you will see later. Starting in 1933, this was the first time since 1921 for Duesenberg, so it took 12 years for Maserati to be the first one to use hydraulic brakes on racing cars in Europe. And this is a photograph of their 8-cylinder supercharged car. And interestingly, the year after, 1934, Mercedes moved into the arena, and in 1935, Auto Union, both the two other companies used master cylinders built by a Lockheed licensee, Alfred James. So that was the beginning of the racing work with Lockheed brakes, and it really proved the point. By 1913, there were 4 Lockheed licensed groups worldwide. The symbols are shown on the left. Bendix, Lockheed, of course, in the US, Canada, and South America. There was Alfred James, ATE, in Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Czech Republic. And a major one in Leamington Spa in England was and is still Automotive Products. And in France was the DBA company, which meant to affiliate Bendix, Lockheed, Air Equipment. And they had the Bendix license, the Lockheed and Bendix licenses for braking systems all over the French-speaking world. Coming to the timeline, just to repeat how this went, this timeline is helpful. It shows the Lockheed patents on the left-hand side, 1917 to 1926. The patents enabled the hydraulic transformation. The major events, 24 to 28, when Bendix huge growth from 650,000 to 3.6 million sets annually. Then Lockheed selling the factory and patents to Bendix finally by 1930. And in the USA, by 1938, GM and Chrysler were 100% hydraulic, and Ford had joined the group also. And then by 1940, UK and Germany were 100% hydraulic, joining the USA, and France very quickly followed, but of course they were all involved in the Second World War by then. So that brings this exposition to a conclusion. The summary is that by the 1920s were these two competing systems. Mechanical was clearly on the way out, hydraulic was on the way in. The argument was the mechanical brakes had no fluid leaks all over the floor in the garage and were inherently well tried and safe, and everybody knew how to repair them. But Lockheed's claims for equal force application, much better, even smoother brake performance, very simple system with no rods, levers, pivots, and cables to stretch, unaffected by rust and corrosion. It simply meant that hydraulics were therefore rapidly adopted as the best solution, and that's how it's been ever since 1940. Thank you for your time with this presentation. Following on from the final 1940s slide of hydraulic brake evolution, our co-author, Bob Elton, has pointed out the extraordinarily sophisticated system developed by Rolls-Royce from mid-60s to about 1968. And the brake pedal, in fact, was not connected directly to the brakes, but to a mechanical servo, which was transmission-driven, and that harks back to the Hispano-Suiza system of 1919. The faster the car goes, the more powerful is the assistance to the brakes, which is inherently a good thing. And when the car is standing still, in fact, the brakes effectively don't work, but they hold the car, of course, can't roll anywhere. It has, you can still, these cars are still running, two separate hydraulics to each front wheel and one hydraulic circuit and a mechanical connection to each rear wheel. So it had probably the most sophisticated safety brake system using dual circuit hydraulics, which have been standard, of course, in all passenger cars since the 50s, and were first introduced by Mercedes on race cars in 1939. But this Rolls-Royce system is something to behold, and is about as complex as one could get. The second slide in this is the 67 version, and what's happening then is the brake pedal is at least connected to a master cylinder that operates one of the circuits to the rear wheels, and there is also on this system two high-pressure pumps, hydraulic pumps, engine-driven, to charge hydraulic accumulators that store fluid at very high pressure. And when the brake pedal operates valves, when open, they allow the hydraulic pressure fluid to apply the calipers. And there are two valves, two circuits to each front wheel, and one front wheel circuit also operates one rear wheel circuit. So it was essentially what used to be called a T-shaped circuit. It was used on other cars, less sophisticated this way. And another challenge for workshops is that there are 10 bleeding points to make sure you get all the air out of the system. So these two fascinating diagrams are provided by my co-author Bob Elton, and I want to end by thanking Steve Rode, my other collaborator for XGM Research, who is the miracle man with all of the graphics in this 29-slide presentation. Thank you.